So there seems to be a general consensus among mainstream academia that geometry was discovered by the Greeks. I've had the privilege to read your book, The Ancient World's Foundation Stone, and you attribute the discovery of geometry to the Egyptians. Could you explain a little bit of this for us?
Well, in geometry, what has happened is that most scholars have given Greece the accolade because they actually see geometric patterns that are obvious and overt expressions. Whereas in Egypt, it was more not covert, which is not really the right word, but it was more hidden. And so the very most important part of my work is to prove that the three um, pyramids on the Giza Plateau, the three main pyramids, were actually representing three witnesses to a much larger field that measures the Earth. And because it's geometrically precise, it actually changes who actually learned and who actually practiced geometry first. Now, it's actually kind of funny because scholars are supposed to be scientific, and yet when you ask, well, why do you believe that even though Plato and Socrates, these guys that went and studied for 20 plus years in Egypt and then came back to teach in Greece, why it was that when they said that they learned it from the Egyptians, that our scholars are saying that, oh, well, just the copyists that actually copied the works of Plato, since it's been copied so many times, that at some point they interjected the idea that the Greeks got their knowledge of geometry from the Egyptians. But this is very incredibly not a scientific statement. There is no evidence of such a thing. And in actuality, the Egyptians and the way they built the Giza Plateau pyramid complex absolutely and definitively knew geometry to the extent that they could measure all three measurements of the Earth, the mean circumference, the polar circumference, and the equatorial circumference, to within a ridiculously close margin. And this is something that is really unknown. Many people focus just on the Great Pyramid, giving it the accolade, perhaps separating it out. I know in The Flower of Life, Trinvalo's told a story that the Atlanteans actually built the Great Pyramid 13,000 years ago, even though there's no actual evidence of that. And the other thing was around radiocarbon dating. This is a really controversial subject, especially if you believe in the biblical model. But ultimately, what I found is that people are picking and choosing when they choose to believe that radiocarbon dating is accurate and when they don't. And so when all of a sudden you'll find something and they'll say, oh, this was 13,000 years, and this was 30,000 years ago, and this was 50,000 years ago using radiocarbon dating, when in fact, as you go through these half-life cycles of 5,700 and whatever years it is for the half-life of carbon-14, in actuality, the most accurate measurements are the more recent, up to about the first half-life, which is just about the time when the pyramids were built. So to claim that the pyramids, which suggest, when you do radiocarbon-14 dating, actually does line up within the historical timeline, that in actuality, they'll just ignore that. And this is one of the problems, and why I call my book Corrections to the Field. It's because there's so many stories and people are building models off of other people's stories. It's like a giant house of cards, and as soon as you prove one thing, you pull that piece out, the entire thing collapses. And so from my point of view, I felt that, we need to have a definitive spot where we know something happened, it had a certain amount of knowledge, and then that can become a foundation from which we can extend further back in time to see whether or not these same types of understandings around geometry or around astronomy, we can actually track it in a more scientific way than just busting out Starry Night Pro and go, oh, look, this does this, and look, this does this, or picking and choosing when a radiocarbon date is acceptable to the theory.